regions. There are many different types of Amish, but they all really share the same core beliefs, which are a belief in adult baptism, which leads to them being referred to as Anabaptist, and also to them leading a simple, basic way of life, which is very important to their beliefs and culture.
So I think probably one of the most important misconceptions of the Amish is that they avoid medical technology or avoid technology in general. What they actually do, and this is quite important to the work that we do, is really consider whether a technology or a medical intervention is going to benefit them, their family or their community, or if it's going to be more harmful to their way of life. So even the most conservative Amish, some of them their children wouldn't wear shoes a lot of the time, they wouldn't have mirrors in their houses, their dolls don't have faces, but we've seen them accept a cochlear implant, a device that helps their children to hear, and they would charge that device on a horse-drawn generator. So they have considered the benefit of that to their child, and they've taken that technology for that reason. And probably the other thing that's really important to the work that we do is that the Amish don't have health insurance. So all of the funding for healthcare provision within the community comes from the community itself. So that's why the work that we do, it can be of tremendous benefit to them.
Yeah, fascinating, especially to debunk some of those myths and stereotypes. Am I right in saying they are communities that are geographically restricted and also
continue straight,
marry
then
within?
Turn
so
right.
There's a high degree of endogamy.
Well, they're not geographically restricted.
Turn right.
Due to their expansion of the population and the large families, they rapidly ran out of land in Ohio and Pennsylvania, and so have moved throughout the USA and set up settlements and church groups now in most states, and in fact not just in America but also in Canada and other countries of the world.
So when you're using the word endogamous, Adam, you're
at the
describing
roundabout,
a
take the
community
first
that marries
exit.
within a community.
Take
Wherever
the
you
exit.
come from in the world determines what types of genetic conditions you have. The Amish, like most of us, would tend to marry people with whom they have commonalities,
In
so common
200
beliefs
meters,
and common goals
turn
in
left.
life. Consequently, the particular types of genetic conditions
Turn
that
left.
they have a particular spectrum of genetic conditions that are more common in their community, some that are absent or rarer, but all of the conditions we see would be found everywhere else in the world also. It's no different really to us being back here in Devon, where similarly we see particular types of genetic conditions more often.
Well, let's talk about what those conditions are. For many years you've been looking at the incidence of genetic diseases within the Amish communities. What are the headline figures?
Well, I think when the programme began in the year 2000,
Turn
there
left.
was really a poor understanding of
You have
the
arrived.
conditions that were present in the community. 5% of individuals at that time had a specific genetic diagnosis for their disorder. Through time and through the work that we and others have done, that figure is now 75% or thereabouts.
We've probably now, I think, defined 18 new genetic causes of disease that were not known to medical science before the work that we did with the community. But on top of that, we've also defined probably somewhere in the region of 70, maybe more than that, genetic conditions that had previously been recognised outside of the Amish community but never had been recognised, or the genetic cause been recognised within the community. So that's been really, really fundamentally important to driving that 75% figure.
When you say 18 new causes, that's 18 new diseases previously undescribed that are, well, they've been discovered primarily in the Amish community, or are these causes of diseases that were already established outside of that community?
They're disorders that are new to medical science. They haven't been seen before. Each and every one of those conditions, bar one, currently has been identified in families outside the community. So it was just that we were able to describe and identify that condition through those studies.
And give me an example of what those conditions are and how serious they are.
Within the Amish previously, children and adults were seen at specialist clinics and they were described as having autism or cerebral palsy. So the work that we've done has identified 3 new causes of autism within the community, or what children that have been labelled as autism, actually those children have complex syndromes and additional medical problems as a result of them. So one of those would be a condition that resembles Angelman syndrome. We described it as an Amish Angelman syndrome purely because that's where we recognised it initially. They have a number of characteristics in common with Angelman syndrome, which is one of the commoner genetic conditions found across the world, but they also have a number of differences. Those children present early on in life. They're very floppier than their healthy brothers and sisters. They have some of the behavioural characteristics of autistic children. They have particular findings on their brain imaging, but most importantly, those children have very characteristic characteristic appearance to their feet. So they have a very long, big toe. So if you take off their socks, you can usually make the diagnosis. And those children had had thousands and thousands of pounds of medical investigations before we were able to define that condition. So they'd had neuroimaging scans of their brain, invasive, painful tests like muscle biopsies, and our genetic findings enabled a clinical diagnosis to be made by the clinicians in the community and the specialist clinics, but also a targeted genetic not-for-profit test at $70 to enable a really quick diagnosis for those children.
And presumably these early and more precise diagnoses that is coming out of your work aid the families in how to treat those conditions.
Absolutely. So there's, I guess, two different benefits to that. One being, we know from the work that we've done and the work that the clinics have done that if we can make a diagnosis in these children early, their developmental outcome is better because we know the specific developmental spectrum and problems that they have with their learning that can be addressed by physiotherapists, occupational therapists and the special needs schools who we work really closely with. But for some of those diagnoses of autism that we've made, these new disease genes that we've discovered, those children have particular other medical problems they might get. So for one of the disorders, they have a very high risk of developing seizures. We can treat those seizures better if the family know to expect them, the clinicians know to expect them, and they are treated with particular medications that we know help. And previously all of those children would have just been labelled as autism with no further information, no way of thinking about managing their medical problems going forwards.
Yeah, and I believe we've got a clip of an Amish mother, Melinda Yoder, describing how this project has helped the diagnosis of two of her children.
We have two children with MASD syndrome. Sarah May is 13 years old and Kyle is 7. It was not a condition that had been given a name or studied. Later, after meeting with several more families and seeing what most of the children and adult symptoms were, it was named after the most common symptoms. M stands for macrocephaly, A, anxiety.